Okay, thank you for patiently waiting, those who have been waiting, and good morning, good evening, or good afternoon for everyone here, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Luke Howard, and I am the host for today's webinar on the Plan Vivo Standard Update, or more specifically, the public consultation phase of the Standard Update. So, just before we get into things, I'll run through some housekeeping. Firstly, everyone is on mute, but we welcome you to submit any questions that you have via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will have 15 minutes for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, through which we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. However, we will try and prioritize those questions that we feel might not be well answered or best answered in the documentation that we will soon be putting on our website. But if you do have a question that doesn't get answered and you would still like a direct answer, then we recommend that you email us at our info@planvivofoundation.org email address after the event, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. The webinar is approximately going to be 45 to 60 minutes, again, including that 15 minutes Q&A session at the end. And it is being recorded, and the recorded video will be uploaded onto our website as soon as possible after the event, so you can share it with any colleagues. Finally, any documents that we are referring to in this webinar today will, and further information around these documents will be provided on the Plan Vivo website later today, so you can take a look at the documents and provide your feedback and so on. So, moving now into the structure of the webinar. First, we'll look at the Plan Vivo perspective. So this will be provided by our Chief Executive Officer, Keith Bohannon, who will talk about where Plan Vivo has come from, where we're going to go into the future, and how this standard update fits into that progression and strategy. Then we'll have an overview of the main changes in the latest version of the Plan Vivo Standard, which will be provided by Eva Schoff. Then we'll dive a bit more into detail. So we'll look at the main documents that are in the Plan Vivo Standard, which are the project requirements, the methodology requirements, and the validation and verification requirements. And we'll talk about what's in these documents, what's new, and what's the same compared to the old version of the Plan Vivo Standard. This will be led by Nick Berry, who's the chair of our technical advisory committee, but also Eva Schoff will again support on that role, especially with the validation and verification requirements. Then finally, we'll move into that question and answer session that I talked about earlier, for which again, you are more than welcome to put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Okay, I will hand over to Keith now, who will talk about the Plan Vivo perspective and how this standard update fits into our progression and strategy. Over to you, Keith.
Thanks very much, Luke. Yeah, first of all, welcome everybody. Thanks a lot for making the time, especially given how close we are to COP. I'm sure everyone's extremely busy preparing for what's to come. Also, just wanted to say a big thank you to the whole team involved in the preparation of the standard update. It's been going on for some time and had a lot of consultations with various stakeholders. So we're very pleased to be able to launch a public consultation today, and really looking forward to getting your input and feedback over the next month. So my role today is really just to give an overview of where this fits into the Plan Vivo strategy. I think you're all pretty familiar with who we are, but just as a bit of a recap in case anyone isn't. Plan Vivo, we're a charitable foundation and a voluntary carbon market standard, and we've been operating for over 25 years. At the core, I think, of Plan Vivo is the belief that to work directly with those people most affected by climate change. In our case, that's smallholders and rural communities across the world. The Plan Vivo model puts those smallholders and communities right at the center of the design process. So this is very much about engaging people and working with them to co-design projects that can be sustainable land use projects Through the Plan Vivo Standard, we give access to these communities to the voluntary carbon market, a market they might otherwise not be able to access. And through that access, we make sure that they get equitable benefits from the sale of fairly traded carbon credits, at least 60% as a requirement within the standard. And we're the only standard to do that. We also have a model which, of course, is about real, measurable and additional carbon impact, but not just carbon. We want a more holistic model where we can also see impact for livelihoods, for resilience strengthening, and also for biodiversity conservation. Since we've been running, as I said, over 25 years, our impact to date has been, so far we've got over 5 million tons of CO2 emission reductions. We're reaching almost 90,000 people through our projects. We have 175,000 hectares under land management and 130,000 hectares under conservation. And through the sale of Plan Vivo certificates, we've generated $18 million to go straight back to communities and participants. So as part of that equitable benefit sharing commitments. And a number of Plan Vivo projects have also had recognition, international recognition in terms of the Equator Prize and SEED Awards as well. So maybe just to touch a little bit on the context of where we are today as we launch this public consultation and some of the motivation behind the standard update. We see today a high demand, in fact, more supply than demand in the voluntary carbon market, in particular for sequestration projects and projects that are delivering high value carbon credits with co-benefits. So very much in line with the Plan Vivo model. We also see a lot of talk about the projected growth of the VCM. Again, given the scale of the climate challenge, it's clear that that lots of solutions and different approaches are required, and the VCM is seen as being one vehicle that can enable that. And organizations like the Task Force for Scaling the Voluntary Carbon Market are predicting very high levels of growth in the voluntary carbon market in the coming years. We also then, linked to that, have interest from new markets, from maybe more the international development, conservation space, and different parts of the private sector to get involved in the VCM. And of course, we have COP starting next week, bringing renewed interest in natural climate solutions and the role they can play. I think at this point, it's also worth saying that while the standard update is looking to change and improve some of the things Plan Vivo do, and Eva will talk through that in much more detail, Plan Vivo is looking to stay true to the core values on which we were founded. We still believe that the key to tackling climate change is really empowering and working directly with communities and smallholders. That's not going to change. We also believe that while in this standard update, we're proposing some areas where we have strengthened and made the standard more robust, but we want to retain the accessibility that we've had. And we do see that Plan Vivo is a vehicle for market access where other standards, which are maybe larger, are more difficult for communities and smallholders to access the market. So we want to retain that accessibility aspect of what we do. And we want to retain the holistic approach. Again, as I said, we want to make maybe some elements of the standard a bit more clear, and that's often linked to the climate impact, but also we don't want to lose out the community and the biodiversity or nature impact. In fact, we're looking to strengthen both of them as well. And I think if we look back and see what people think of when they think of Plan Vivo, obviously we have this 25 years of experience, and I think that brings with it a certain set of knowledge, some experience, and the challenges and rewards of working on community projects. That's something we want to tap into more. It's something we want to learn from, and something we want to use, I think, to have a bigger influence on in the space and in how communities can be better represented in some of these discussions. We want to keep a process which is really putting those communities and smallholders at the heart of it. It needs to be flexible and supportive and keep the participatory element. And we want to keep that strong commitment to equitable benefit sharing because ultimately that's what's going to deliver the change on the ground. I'd like to share with you a little bit of Plan Vivo's more detailed strategy, and with this potential, we're looking, of course, to scale and to increase our impact. But again, we want to do that in what we're calling a scaling with care approach. And this is a theory of change which touches on some of the key components which we're looking to strengthen. So our aim is to improve livelihoods and increase resilience, climate resilience for rural smallholders and communities, and to do this at scale within our existing model. To do that, we see three areas where we want to strengthen. One is increasing the potential for impact investment at scale, where we have improved practices, systems, and processes where risk can be reduced for potential investors and for projects. We want to strengthen the Plan Vivo model itself, improving the efficiency and the impact monitoring we have for scaling, and of course the standard update is a central component of that. And also we want to work in partnership with other organizations to strengthen the capacity of the smallholders and the communities and the project developers that we work with. So we have a scaling with care aspect, which is really about taking a more of a programmatic and landscape perspective. We have impact project and impact monitoring platform, which is trying to bring together the data and the learning we have from Plan Vivo. And then we have what we're calling a community project incubator, where we can bring together some of this learning and knowledge and hopefully accelerate pipeline potential to realize some of the market demand that's happening. So that's just a little flavor of some of the strategy we're working on. How does that come together? Well, you've probably seen before in our presentations during the year, we have these strategic paths about mature growth, about branching out with new partnerships, and about broadening our roots to have a wider influence in the policy landscape. And our ambition within 5 years is to increase our impact by 10 times of what we have today. So reaching 1 million people and delivering 50 million tons of CO2 emission reductions and increasing the number of hectares under sustainable land use to 800,000. So these are very ambitious numbers. But we feel that the Plan Vivo Standard Update will give us a very strong platform on which to build this, and we look forward to working with you, our stakeholders, our project developers, our resellers and buyers to build this together over the next 5 years. So I'll stop there and I'll pass over to Eva now to talk you through more of the detail and the overview of the main changes in the Standard Update. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith, and hello, everyone. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Eva Schoff. I'm a program manager at the Plan Vivo Foundation, and I'll talk you through the main changes that we are introducing with this new version of the standard. But before we delve into those, I wanted to take a couple of moments to talk about why we update our standard periodically and also what the process has been to get here today. So as Keith mentioned earlier, the Plan Vivo Standard has been around for over 25 years. So a very early version of the standard dates back to the early 90s, and it has been periodically updated over the last few years in order to incorporate lessons learned and experience that we've had with projects. And the last version that we are working with is version 4, which was updated in 2013, which was specifically introduced to enable particularly RED project, but also innovative projects such as blue carbon projects or improved land use management projects to register under the Plan Vivo Standard. So this brings us to this particular version that we're introducing today. As I mentioned, main objective always of updating the standard is to incorporate lessons and experience that we've had over the last few years, but also obviously since the adoption of the Paris Agreement in 2015, there have been many developments in the voluntary carbon market, and it's sort of an ever-evolving landscape that this particular version of the Plan Vivo standard attempts to position itself in. As always, we try to strengthen technical and socioeconomic aspects of the standard as much as possible, but at the heart of this particular update is also a drive for more transparency. And as we're a growing standard and we're very excited to have so much interest from many projects, there's also a drive for more standardization. Next slide, please, Keith. Sorry, thank you. So just a couple of words about the process to update the Plan Vivo standard. So you might be coming to this new today, or this might be the first time you're hearing about us launching a new version of the standard. But this is a process that has been going on for a couple of years now in the background. So we started in 2018 by creating working groups between the Plan Vivo Secretariat and the Plan Vivo Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC. And we created working groups to look specifically at the thematic areas that we wanted to include into this new version of the Plan Vivo standard, which were particularly 3 working groups on project requirements, methodological requirements, and validation and verification requirements. We've also had ongoing feedback from projects, either through stakeholder meetings or one-on-ones, and also targeted surveys to get input and feedback on some of the things that we wanted to include in this version of the standard. And we established a steering group this year, which was particularly created to discuss strategic positioning of this new version of the standard. And this steering group was made up of key stakeholders in the Plan Vivo network, so project coordinators and technical advisors, but also resellers. And we also commissioned an independent review of the draft project requirements this year to make sure that our project requirements align with best practice and international standards for environmental and social safeguards, such as the IFC performance standards or the World Bank social and environmental framework. And then obviously, as the last step in this process, we're launching the public consultation today, which we're really excited about. And we really hope and encourage you all who are attending to give input and feedback into the proposed changes in the new version of the standard. So to delve into more detail about the main changes that come with this new version of the standard. So if you are familiar with the current version of the Plan Vivo standard, you'll know that it's sort of one document with 8 chapters, which are mainly the requirements for the actual projects in order to register projects and what we would expect to see in the PIN and PDD. And this isn't really changing. This is still sort of the key component of the new version of the Plan Vivo standard, although these requirements have been updated. And in a moment, I'll be handing over to Nick Berry, who will be talking about these requirements in more detail and what has changed in those requirements. But we're also including 2 new sets of requirements, one being the methodological requirements, which is because with this new version of the standard will require projects to use approved methodologies for their carbon accounting. So the methodological requirements will give the minimum requirements for methodology developers to submit methodologies to the Plan Vivo Foundation. And lastly, we have the validation verification requirements, which is really formalizing our process and is aimed at VVBs and auditors to make sure that we have requirements so that people know what we would expect them to audit Plan Vivo projects against. Thank you. Next slide, please. The main change that we're really introducing with this new Plan Vivo standard is a change to our unit types. So again, if you're familiar with the current model, Plan Vivo certificates are issued either ex ante and ex post certificates. And as Keith mentioned earlier, there's a really high demand for high quality carbon credits, specifically from tree planting projects. But there's also emerging best practice, specifically to transparency of when climate benefits are actually being delivered. So our new model for our unit types is really aimed at providing more transparency in terms of when climate benefits are delivered, and also showing the different stages that a Plan Vivo certificate goes through. So with this version of the standard, we are introducing the FPVCs, which is a future Plan Vivo certificate, which, as the name suggests, is a future emissions reduction or removal, which is very much comparable to the current ex-ante system. And then we're introducing the RPVC, which is the reported PVC. And maybe one thing to note here to explain this RPVC is that due to the nature of the Plan Vivo standard and working with small-scale organizations or NGOs that are focused on smallholders and community-based organizations, our requirements currently around verifications are that verifications must happen at least every 5 years. But obviously, there are emission reductions and removals that can be reported within those verification cycles. So in the case of tree planting projects, for example, when sequestration of carbon benefits can be reported and are happening, or for RED and ANR type projects, reporting actual emission reductions or mitigation outcomes based on annual monitoring, which is reported to the Plan Vivo Foundation. And as the last stage in this sort of evolution of a Plan Vivo certificates, we have the VPVCs, which is the verified Plan Vivo certificate, which is obviously when a certificate is verified by a VVB or through a verification process where these emissions reductions or removals are then verified as being real, additional, measurable, and delivered. Sorry, next slide, Keith, please. So this table gives a little bit of an overview of what we're planning with these unit types. So again, we've got the VPVCs, RPVCs, and FPVCs, the VPVC being the verified Plan Vivo certificate, which is a verified emission reduction and removal, which can be issued onto a registry when monitoring reports are verified by a VVB or through the internal verification process. These certificates can be allocated to buyers and can be retired. RPVCs are reported Plan Vivo certificates, which could be issued onto a registry when monitoring reports show that these emissions reductions and removals have been achieved. They can be allocated to buyers, but they can't be retired until they are converted to a VPVC. And the same goes for an FPVC, a future Plan Vivo certificate, which can be issued onto a registry when a project is validated or a new project area is added, can be allocated to a buyer, but again, couldn't be retired until it is converted into a VPVC. And with that, I'll hand over to Nick Berry, the chair of our Technical Advisory Committee, who will talk a little bit more about details in the actual project and methodological requirements.
Great, thanks, Eva. Now, I don't want to overload you with detail, and obviously you'll have the chance to access all of the documents soon after this webinar finishes, and I would definitely encourage you to do that. So I just want to talk through an overview of the structure of these new documents and point out some of the key changes where hopefully you can focus your attention when you're carrying out your own reviews of these documents. So when you look at the project requirements, the first thing you'll notice is it's structured very differently from the previous version. We previously had our requirements structured around 8 principles, and some of those related to carbon accounting and others related to aspects of the project development process. We've focused now the project requirements on basically the information that needs to go into the project design document, and we've moved out anything to do with carbon accounting into the methodology requirements. So now we have these 5 sections in the project requirements document under which the requirements are organized. Next slide. So when you open the document, you'll see something that looks like this, and for each of the headings there, we'll have one or more numbered requirements, which are the hard requirements that projects get validated and verified against. Throughout the documents, you'll see some terms which are italicized. That means they're in the glossary, which is in a separate document. So important to be clear on the definitions of those terms. And there's also some guidance provided in each section, which is supposed to help projects navigate how to demonstrate that these requirements are being met. And you'll see there's also some underlined terms here. And if you see something underlined, that's a link to another either supporting document or template, which we're not releasing under the consultation, but they will follow once the standard is released. And in the project requirements, we've also got a section relating to basic means of verification, basically. So we'll be updating the PDD template to work alongside these requirements. So in this reporting, validation, and verification section, it really just indicates where in the project design document project developers should be demonstrating that these requirements have been met and the type of information that the validators and verifiers will be looking for. So we're trying to do as much as we can to help project developers navigate these new requirements. Next slide. So the sections, under each section, there's a number of headings. And again, these are arranged around the structure of a project design document. So these will map onto the sections in the PDD template. And although the structure has changed and a lot of the language has changed, there's a lot that substantively remains the same from the previous version. And I've just highlighted here where some of the sections where there are more significant changes. But we're not changing the types of projects that can be developed as Plan Vivo projects. These are still land management projects with a focus on protection, restoration, and sustainable management of ecosystems. And we're still focused on project areas that are managed by smallholders and community groups who hold the rights for those areas. There's still a big focus on the process that projects are designed by and the participatory design process. And we've elaborated that a little bit in this version with some clearer definition of the roles of different stakeholders in that participatory design process. And we've added a section on the requirements around free, prior, and informed consent as well, linked to that. Into the project design, the requirements for demonstrating a baseline land use scenario are unchanged, and the carbon baseline requirements kind of work alongside that. We've clarified a little on what baseline livelihood and ecosystem information needs to be provided. And linked to that is a new section on the theory of change, which a lot of projects either have or is kind of implicit from their project design documents, but we'll be likely adding a new section to the PDD where projects have to clearly state their theory of change so that we can be clear on what the causality between the project activities and the expected benefits is. We'll still have technical specifications, which now will be based on the carbon numbers from an approved methodology. And in the risk management section, as Eva mentioned, we've added a new section now on environmental and social safeguards, which is kind of reflective of the fact that although Plan Vivo projects need to be designed with the intention to deliver livelihood and ecosystem benefits, there can be unintended negative social environmental impacts that we also want projects to screen for and make sure that they consider those in the project design stage as well. Around the risk of non-permanence, we've added a definition of permanence, which wasn't there in the previous version. And in this consultation version now refers to reversals of climate benefits, carbon benefits that happen within a 50-year period. And we're suggesting a move away from the current kind of risk level based assignment of risk buffers, and instead having a single percentage risk buffer that gets applied to all projects, provided they can show that their risks are at an acceptable level. The Plan Vivo agreements remain largely unchanged. One area that's new, or really just a kind of clarification of what's been happening up to now, is the minimum and maximum crediting periods and the minimum monitoring periods for project activities. So we've introduced a range that projects have to work within, and in this version it's between 10 and 50 years as a crediting period. Other aspects like the benefit sharing mechanism, as Keith mentioned, with not proposing any change to the 60-40 split in the benefit sharing mechanism, and other aspects of the agreements remain much the same. See the next slide. And then on monitoring and reporting, we have tried to provide some more guidance around the minimum requirements for livelihood and ecosystem monitoring. The carbon monitoring has some changes, but we'll talk about those in the methodology requirements. But there'll still be the annual reporting process that's there in the current version. And the governance and administration requirements are also similar to what we've had before. I think one area where we've introduced or clarified around the level of financial planning information and financial auditing that projects would be required to provide information on. So yeah, the bits highlighted in yellow are ones where you can perhaps focus attention in the consultation. So I think we can move to the methodology requirements. So obviously this is a completely new document. I mean, we have in the current version of the standard, we do have a requirement that projects use approved approaches for their carbon accounting. And these methodology requirements are really an attempt to operationalize that approvement process and an attempt to bring greater standardization to the approaches that projects are using for their carbon accounting. So we'll be introducing a methodology template that people proposing new methodologies will have to complete and submit through an approval process, which is separate to the project approval process. And a key aspect of this is that we'll be specifying the level of uncertainty that projects need to achieve, or the level of precision that projects need to achieve in their carbon accounting. And different sections of the methodology requirements then describe which aspects of uncertainty need to be quantified and how. And then the methodology components section relates to the different sections in the methodology template. So provides information about the level of information that needs to go into those sections, and some of the standard processes and that need to be followed across all methodologies. And we haven't gone to the level of detail to separate these out by different project types in this version. So they're relatively high level requirements. But again, with the aim of trying to standardize and add rigor to the carbon accounting processes. So yeah, definitely interested in all feedback on both the methodology requirements and the project requirements. And I'll hand over to Eva.
Thanks, Nick. Could I have the next slide, please, Keith? Thank you. So on validation verification requirements, that is the last set of requirements in the updated version of the standard. It's a formalized process of what we're already doing. So what isn't new is really that projects need to validate in order to register, and that they must verify their certificates and project design to keep issuing and generating further Plan Vivo certificates. Again, as I mentioned earlier, at least every 5 years. What we've added more detail to is VVB requirements. So these are specifically requirements for VVBs to be approved under Plan Vivo, and that approval process must happen before VVBs are contracted by projects for validations or verifications. So this set of requirements offers more detail on what these requirements are. And we've also formalized an internal validation and verification process, which is a process that is open to microscale projects. Microscale projects we define as projects which generate equal or less to 10,000 tons of climate benefits per year, of carbon benefits per year. And we recognize that these are small scale projects that might not have the same income levels as projects that generate larger volumes. As such, we want to open this internal validation verification process up to these types of projects, where Plan Vivo is the entity that oversees the validation or verification process with the help of independent experts, which are auditors that carry out the site visits with these projects. And as part of these requirements, we'll also be publishing more elaborate guidance for VBBs, specifically on auditing procedures. So how to scope audits, what we expect to see in terms of levels of materiality and levels of assurance, and other auditing procedures. And we will be publishing that guidance as well with the other documents. So if there are auditors amongst you who are attending, we'd be very interested to get input on that guidance as well. And that's it for me. So I'll hand back over to Luke.
Great, thanks Eva, and thank you to Keith and Nick as well for their presentations. So we'll get to the questions in a second. Again, please continue to put them into the Q&A box. But first, I'll just explain the next step in this public consultation process. So, as we've said plenty of times, the launch of the public consultation is today, and the documents that we've been referring to in this presentation will be provided on the website, along with further information later today. So we advise you take a look. There'll be a link to it on the homepage, but also in the menu bar. And we ask that you send any feedback or comments to the info@planvivofoundation.org email address. The public consultation will be open until the 30th of November, so please submit any feedback or comments that you have to us by that date. And we will consider every comment that is submitted to us when redrafting or creating the final versions of this new Plan Vivo Standard, which we expect to then launch in early 2022. So moving on to the questions then, and I thought I'd leave with a nice photo from the Tahiri Honko project in Madagascar, since I know I'm very aware that we've been looking at a lot of text here. You'll also see in the corner of the screen as well some email addresses specific to those who have spoken today if you want to contact people directly rather than use the info account email. But anyway, on to the questions. I think I'd like to start with one for Keith, if that's okay. So if I was an ex-ante project now, or a project that produces ex-ante credits under the current standard, I imagine that these are the types of projects that might have to change the most, or might have the most changes in procedures put upon them in the next version of the standard. So I was wondering if you could just talk about how the current ex-ante projects would fit into the new version of the Plan Vivo standard.
Sure, thanks, Luke. Yeah, we've had also, just to mention, I suppose that question has come up quite a bit in the consultations before this public consultation, with existing projects as well, and we've had some feedback and ideas there. I mean, I think the main point is that's the reason for the creation of the future PVC, the FPVC. The feeling was that while we want to move away from ex post ex ante, we wanted to have a unit type that could be issued on a registry and could be allocated to allow that upfront financing to happen. So the idea of an FPVC is for, let's say, previous ex ante type projects, they can issue as FPVCs, and that allows them some time to build up and to potentially follow the conversion process to convert to VPVCs. So really that's where the main functionality for an ex-ante project is to use the FPVC as a way. Of course, the alternative is that they wait and just issue VPVCs as well, which can be an option too for ex-ante projects. But especially for any projects that have, for example, dry land projects where there's a long period, then we thought we needed some mechanism to allow them to still issue credits and to still allocate credits on the system.
That's great. Thank you, Keith. I guess kind of linking to that as well. So that was specifically talking about how ex-ante projects fit into the new version of the standard. But I was wondering if I could pose one to Eva now. That's more to do with, again, if I'm positioning myself as a project developer under the current version of the standard, how or when should I expect to migrate to the latest version of the standard? So if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so obviously once the new version of the standard is launched, we're expecting projects to use that version of the standard. But with the existing Plan Vivo projects, we are giving them one verification cycle to migrate over to the new version of the standard. So that'll be at least 5 years. We recognize that there might be a lot to change, especially with the change to methodologies. And if any projects have a verification coming up in 2022, we will give them an additional verification cycle, because obviously having a couple of months to migrate over might be quite tough for some of our projects. In terms of PINs that have been received in 2021, we recognize that some of these projects have now started developing their projects using the 2013 version of the Plan Vivo standard. So while we would like to encourage all new projects that have not yet submitted a PDD to use the new version of the standard if they can, we recognize that, as I said, some of them might have already started project development, and registration under the 2013 version of the standard is still possible as long as validation occurs within 2 years of submitting the PIN. I hope that answers your question, Luke, or whoever posed it. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to some that we've had submitted in. We've had one question about whether there's any mechanism in place for converting ex-ante credits, so I guess also potentially ex-post credits from the old standard into these new credit types that we've been talking about today, the FPVCs, the RPVCs, and the VPVCs. I'm happy to answer this question. We don't currently envisage there's a mechanism for changing the ex-ante credits under the old standard into the current types of credits. We see these types of credits as something specific to the latest version of the standard, so it's more about versioning. And then once a project has been migrated to the latest version of the standard, then they can start issuing these new types of credits. We are happy, however, to help a conversion process from ex-ante into ex-post under the old version of the standard since this is something that we have been looking at for a while. So yeah, we're happy with that conversion process, but right now we don't foresee a mechanism to convert old ex-ante or ex-post credits into the new types of credits that FPVCs, RPVCs, and VPVCs. Yeah, so okay, on to the next question. We've had one around benefit sharing. So I think someone isn't very familiar with the current benefit sharing model, this idea of 60-40, and was wondering where does the fees to Plan Vivo come from? So Eva, is it okay if you explain that as well? Maybe just give a bit of background on the 60-40 split as well.
Yeah, of course. So thanks again for the question. So the 60-40 split was obviously in our previous version of the standard and will still be in this updated version of the standard. So I think the question is, when does Plan Vivo sort of recover fees, and where do Plan Vivo fees come in? So Plan Vivo as an organization recovers its fees through the reviews of documents, obviously, such as PINs, PDDs. Yeah, those are really the two main ones. But in terms of issuance fee, so we have another fee, which is called the issuance fee, which is basically the cost of issuing a Plan Vivo certificate onto the registry. And to be honest, it's a good question, because in the past, I think we weren't quite explicit about at what point out of the sales revenue that should be counted, whether that's pre-giving communities 60% or post allocating 60%. So we try to be more specific about this in the current guidance. And our guidance is very much to take, once sales revenue comes in, to pay the Plan Vivo issuance fees, and afterwards do the 60-40 split. So 60% going to the communities and 40% to the project coordinator.
Thanks, Eva. And I think I might stay on you again for the next question, if that's okay, because it's something related to what you've already spoken about in the presentation. We've just had a question as well. I think it's still slightly unclear for some the difference between FPVCs and RPVCs. I was wondering if you could just provide a bit more information on that, and hopefully that could clear some things up for people.
Yeah, so again, I think one thing to note is, as I mentioned earlier, and what has been repeated throughout this presentation, so because we work with community-based, smallholder-focused projects and tend to work with NGOs, our verification cycles are at least every 5 years, which means that quite a few projects can report certain emissions reductions and removals and mitigation outcomes before verifications take place. So the main purpose is really for the RPVC, which I should mention is really also aimed at mainly at RED projects and ANR projects that we have registered under the Plan Vivo Standard, which obviously annually report their mitigation outcomes and emission reductions based on achieving certain targets and achieving reduce deforestation, for example, or reducing fires or illegal logging, or whatever it is the project activities foresee. So the RPVC is really a way for those types of projects to record those emissions reductions, which are reported based on monitoring data and having achieved certain targets, before they are then converted into a verified Plan Vivo certificate once they are verified. And likewise for the FPVC, so the tree planting projects, again, this is an opportunity for them to show when actual sequestration of carbon benefits has actually occurred as trees grow. Thank you, Luke.
No, thanks, Eva. Sorry for pinning two on you in a row. Yeah, so I mean, related to this, we had a question from someone asking about how prices might differ between FPVCs, RPVCs, and VPVCs. At the moment, we can't really say much about this, to be honest. We definitely believe there's a market out there based on our consultations for these differentiation of credit types, but we'll have to wait and see as to how that evolves over time. These markets have definitely exist already. Other standards work with credit types that are similar to FPVCs. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see as time goes on. We've had a couple of questions in again about methodologies, and more specifically methodologies under other standards. So I was wondering if I could pass this to Nick, possibly. So Nick, people are asking if Plan Vivo might consider methodologies that have been accepted under other standards that could be applied under Plan Vivo. Do you know if any headway's been made in that space?
Yeah, it's definitely been considered in the development of the methodology requirements, particularly CDM and VCS methodologies. And I think in this version, we have said that we'll accept CDM methodologies. So yeah, definitely interested to hear people's thoughts around that through the consultation, and whether we should broaden that out or narrow it down. But we do recognize that there is definitely crossover with the Plan Vivo methodology requirements and those of other standards. So we don't want to be reinventing the wheel if it's not necessary.
That's great, thank you. And then I've got a couple people asking about a CROA. So I was wondering if I could pass this one over to Keith. Keith, do we have any update on whether Plan Vivo might be a CROA endorsed anytime in the future?
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I suppose just for clarity, the current version of the Plan Vivo standard is not endorsed by CROA. Obviously, we are quite keen to have the update endorsed. We've had discussions with CROA for the last 12 months, very constructive discussions where CROA have given us very clear feedback on areas of the current version of the Plan Vivo standard that would need to be updated in order to get a CROA endorsement. So that has been part of our consultation so far. We've taken that into account. We feel we've addressed all of those in the current standard update. And we've got more positive feedback from CROA, for example, on the new unit types. So as part of this public consultation, obviously, we'll take any other feedback, we'll finalize the documentation, and then we will formally apply to CROA for endorsement with the final documentation. And we're hopeful that endorsement will come true after that. So the short answer is we're not endorsed at the moment, but we're very hopeful that the new version or the updated version will get a CROA endorsement.
That's great, thank you. We've got another question that I'm happy to take around methodologies, which is how long could methodologies that are currently approved, these are things that we actually call approved approaches under the current Plan Vivo standard, how long do they have to migrate to the latest version of the standard before they can be applied again? Essentially, there isn't really a time frame on this, but it does relate to when the projects can then start using them. So if a project must migrate within 3 years, then there needs to be a methodology ready for them to migrate within that 3-year period. We'll be happy to, so that when they start, then they have a methodology that they can land on. We will be happy to support and help anyone who's submitting a methodology to us. We plan to, just delving into this a bit further, we do plan to have ready-made methodologies for the majority or the major land use types that Plan Vivo projects currently apply available, so that there's something for projects to move on to. But we do also welcome anyone to submit their own methodologies, whether new or as from being an old approved approach. And we will work with those methodology developers to get it through this certification process so that projects can then apply them. One more for you, Keith, if that's okay. Apologies coming back to you so quickly, but I was just wondering if there's any change in the issuance fees going forward. So I guess this is more related to fees. So is there anything you could just tell us around that?
Sure, Luke. We're still reviewing the fees that will go with the standard updates. What we can say at the moment is that the fee structure will remain the same. So that idea of keeping the review fees and the upfront costs as low as possible and charging a fee at issuance, which we see as a way to increase access for projects, so they don't have to pay a lot of upfront review fees and then lower issuance fees later. So we'll try and rear load the payments as normal, but I would say we haven't had a standard update in a while, so there probably will be small increases in review fees just because they haven't been updated in such a long time. In terms of other changes on the costs, I imagine there will be costs involved with from the registry with converting credits, and we're still trying to get some clear guidance from IHS Markit on exactly what those costs will be. We have some examples from other standards like Woodland Carbon Code who already do that. So we have some ideas of the cost, but we still need to get something more specific for Plan Vivo. So I would say it's still under review and there will be some changes, but I would not expect to see anything radically different from the model we use today.
And so just following up on that question, someone asked specifically to these conversion fees. So this idea that if you convert your credit, there's a fee associated with it. I don't know if we can say much around that at the moment either.
Yeah, so that would be a fee on the market registry. And yeah, we're not exactly sure how much that would be yet. We need to get some more clarity from market on it. It's not going to be a huge increase, I would imagine, from what people pay on as issuance fees at the moment, but we still have to just figure out exactly what it would be.
Okay, super, thank you. I think we've got through most questions and we're running out of time, so I will just finish on one more question, if that's okay. Again, sorry, Keith, I think this will go to you. Round off your day. Do you believe we're going to be prescriptive on any claims associated with these credits in the future, or are we going to follow a different path?
Good question. Well, I think we had a lot of discussions around this in the Plan Vivo steering group around claims guidance and what Plan Vivo should do in this space. I think we feel as a standard, our focus is on the quality and the clarity of what Plan Vivo certificates stand for. That's why that's been one of the main drivers of coming up with the new unit types. Regarding what claims guidance comes from how you use those unit types, we don't particularly feel it's our place, because we feel how those credits are allocated and represented, and the integrity of that is down to the buyers and the resellers who are managing that. It's normally part of a joined up strategy on sustainability and offsets and reductions. It's very hard for us as a standard to make any judgment call or guidance on that without knowing the full details of how those units are being used. So we feel our job is to just make it very clear what each unit stands for. A VPVC is a verified Plan Vivo certificate, and that's very clear. And if people want to retire those, they can, and claim with those, they can. There's also a very clear guidance out in the market about what can be used for what and what can be claimed when in terms of climate neutrality and net zero. And we feel buyers and resellers know that well and can follow those best practice guidelines. We don't feel it's our place to tell them. So yeah, the short answer again is we're not planning to develop claims guidance from Plan Vivo Standard on how our units are used.
That's super, thank you. I will actually squeeze in one more, just because I've seen one come in that I think is quite relevant. Someone asked, who will make the changes from the credit types, FPVCs to RPVCs, RPVCs to VPVCs on the registry? I'm happy to answer that. It's not yet, it's a mechanism that we need to discuss more detail with markets, but it would be something that it would likely be controlled by markets or Plan Vivo, whereby the conversion from FPVCs to RPVCs occurs based on monitoring data, and the conversion from RPVCs to verified PVCs occurs when an audit event happens. So from the perspective of the buyer and the project, it will almost be automatic, but the work will actually be done by Plan Vivo and market. that's what we envision anyway. We still need to discuss this further with market, but that's likely going to be the case. Okay, so that wraps up the Q&A session. Thank you again for joining us today. If we haven't answered any questions or you think of any more, please email us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Like I said earlier, the documents will be available on the Plan Vivo website from later today. You'll be able to find them either on the homepage or through the menu on the side of the website. And we really do encourage you to take a look and give us your honest feedback. We can only get this far and go further with the support of our wider stakeholders and the view of the market. So we encourage you to take a look. But otherwise, it's a thank you from me and the rest of the panelists here today. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.